Hey guys, Mr. Mini Painter here, and today I'm going to show you how I painted Háma, the Prince of Rohan, from the War of the Rohirrim expansion to the Middle-earth strategy battle game. Now this is a beautiful miniature in two parts, it's one on foot, one mounted, and I'm going to show you how I painted both of them. And the way I'm doing it is that I'm painting the standing version first, because the colors of the mounted version are exactly the same, and in the final part of the video you can see how I painted the horse and all the accessories to that. Now, there are a couple of different assembly options with this model, so it could be that your miniature has a different head and or weapon. So keep that in mind while checking the video, because some things can be slightly different. So let's get to painting! So here are the two miniatures. I primed them in a light gray primer and then added some modeling sand to the base, as you can see here. There is still that hole in the base, but I'm going to cover that up with some foliage or rock or whatever later on in basing the model. You can do so by your own choice, of course. Now, as I told you before, I'm going to paint this standing version first, because all of the colors, the armor, etc. is exactly the same on the mounted version, so we're going to do that later and pick it up from there. Step 1 is painting the skin tone, and for this particular model it's only his face, and I'm using some Night Quester flesh here as a base color. Make sure you get a nice, good coverage. Don't forget all of those tiny details. There's part of the ear showing here. And of course his neck. Next I'm highlighting that with some Cadian flesh tone. First I'm outlining the brightest parts, so the nose, the eyebrows, the cheekbones, the upper lip, the chin, etc. And next I'm thinning down my paint and kind of blending those colors together. And the way I'm doing that is thin down my paint and kind of pull my paint towards the brightest part of the color you want it to be. I'm doing the same with some Kislev flesh. For an extreme highlight you can add some frown here if you want. Make that forehead a tiny bit brighter, but also thin down your paint and do so in several layers. So you get this nice transition in face colors. To kind of blend those colors together, I'm adding some Rhineland flesh shade all over the model and making sure those eye sockets are nice and dark. For the eyes themselves, I'm using some palette witch flesh and making sure to stay in the middle of the eye socket. So just paint the eye so that the remaining area is nice and dark. You get this eye that really pops out. I'm adding a pupil with some Abaddon black, and we're done with the eyes. If you kind of mess up at this point, it's not a big deal. You can just go over the previous face color layer and do it again. I'm adding some Carroburg Crimson to paint the lips of the miniature, just to give them a slightly different color. Next, with some Steel Legion drab, I'm painting the base color of the blonde hair. This bright brown is a great base tone for all your blonde hair, and you can build up those colors from here. Now there are of course different types of blonde, so a dark blonde, a light blonde, more of a golden look. So I'm going to show you how I did this one, but of course there are many other ways. I started highlighting this with some Xandri dust once dry, just picking out those individual strands of hair. Now, if you find this a bit too difficult, you can hold your brush sideways and still be able to touch those hairs very clean without messing up the rest. I'm giving it another extreme highlight with some Ushabti bone, and that goes for a kind of light blonde look. For this step, I'm focusing mostly on the top of the head and the front of the miniature. Now it's time for some Black Templar. I'm using this contrast paint to paint over these panels of his armor. And the reason I'm doing this with Black Templar is that it instantly creates a nice shade and brighter part to it. Because of course you can do so with Abaddon Black or any kind of black you have and build it up from there, but this is so much easier. Same goes for the chest armor here. And the armor on his lower arms. And shoulder pads. Next up, I'm mixing some Khorne Red and Abaddon Black to paint the inside of the cloak. Now it's good to do this in an early stage, because as you can see I'm touching everything surrounding it, because it's very hard to reach. Now that's not a big deal, because we still have to paint the rest anyways, but it's good to do so early on, so you don't mess up your beautiful artwork later in your process. Next I'm taking some lead belcher and I'm painting all the chainmail and metal parts of the miniature. Once dried, I'm washing everything with some Nuln Oil to get those nice shades back in there. I'm dirtying up the chainmail a little bit with some Agrax Earthshade, thinned down with some water. Then it's time for some Skavenblight Dinge to paint the panels on those lower armor. Once that's done, it's time for the cloak, and for that I'm mixing some Caliban Green and Castellan Green to get a nice gradient somewhere in the middle. At this point be careful not to touch the inside, we painted red, otherwise we have to redo that again. Now I'm also painting the back of the trousers here behind the armor in the same green color. Then it's time to highlight that by mixing some Warboss Green into the Caliban Green and go for the larger panels. Leave the inside of the folds nice and dark in the previous color we used. We're repeating this step with pure Warboss Green. First we're kind of lining those top parts out, and next we're blending it a little bit by pulling the paint towards the brightest part with a thinned down version. Then for an extreme highlight we're using some Ogreen Camo. Just touch those very edges that you want to be the brightest. So focus mainly on the bottom parts here, the shoulders, and a tiny bit on the front. Next color is the browns, and we're starting with some Rhinox hide. I'm first painting the scabbard of the sword. Then also the straps around his body holding the quiver on his back. Then the straps of the armor on his lower legs. And his lower arms. Next brown I'm using is dried bark, and I'm using that for the bow. As well as a quiver on his back. Then with some Steel Legion drab, I'm painting the upper part of the quiver, which is kind of the inside of a leather skin, or so it looks, so it should be brighter than the outside. I'm then using some Corvus black to paint the bottom part. Then it's back to Steel Legion drab for the straps around the middle of the bow. Then with some lead belcher I'm painting the very ends of the bow, as well as any other metal parts remaining, such as the tip of the arrow, and also some buckles on his belt here. Then the rest of the medallion on his chest and other gold details are painted with Retributor armor. That is part of the sword here, as well as the top of the scabbard. And some tiny buckles over here. Then I wanted to have him have black arrows. I'm using Black Templar to do so, but you can use any kind of black you have. Don't forget the arrows in the back of his quiver, because the tips should have the same color. Then with some Null Null, I'm painting over the white feathers. And remember, I primed the model in a light grey primer. If you haven't done so, you can paint them with some grey sear before. Make sure to not leave any puddles of oil. Next I'm washing some Agrax Earthshade into the browns we painted before. First on the grip of the bow over here. And also on the straps and the quiver on his back. Again, pull away any puddles that are left behind and make sure to get a nice even flow in there. Next I'm highlighting the feathers with some grey sear, but you can use pure white also if you want. Just use a fine detail brush and follow the lines of the feather, and you get some beautiful details in there. Then with some Dawnstone I'm painting the rim of his lower armor. Now I'm shading the gold a tiny bit with some Raglan Flesh shade, just to get those details back. If you want, you can highlight it with some Canoptic alloy. Next I'm using some grey sear to make a very fine line on the bottom part of the armor we painted before. A tiny edge highlight just makes it a little bit more beautiful. Now I also painted my base in grey cere before, and I'm slapping some Garagak sewer on it to give it a nice sand look. And remember, we're painting the horse at the same time, so we're doing all these steps on that as well. Next I'm highlighting the inside of the cloak for the part that would catch the most light with pure corn red. So just a tiny bit on the inside sides here, and the rest can remain darker. Then he's standing on a rock, which I'm painting with Mechanicus Standard Grey. And I'm edge highlighting all the straps on his chest with some Steel Legion drab. Finally, an extreme highlight of some messy desert on the top part of the quiver. Now with a wetted down Doomble Brown, just add 50% of water. I'm adding some highlight here on the back of the quiver, leaving the rest a bit darker, so there's some shade around the straps, so only the middle part is a tiny bit brighter than the rest. And now for the final details, the rock I'm painting with a grey cere and a tiny dry brush. You can do so with a regular brush as well if you want, but this gives it that nice cracked look. Make sure to let that dry before applying some Nuln Oil to get some shades back in there. And we're done with our standing model of Háma. In the second part we're going to paint the horse. And you can see here that I have a version with the helmet on his head, there's also one without. And we're going to start painting that helmet first with some lead belcher. In my version he's holding his sword here, and I'm also painting that with lead belcher. Now it's time to get some base colors on that horse, and I want it to be brown, so I'm using Rhinox brown on the majority of the horse, leaving the manes and tail as they are, and you can leave the hooves for what they are at this point. So just go for the skin. Next step is some Black Templar on all the straps on this horse. You can use any kind of black you have, but because there's a ton of details in these straps, some decoration and stuff like that, I tend to use a contrast paint. Next I'm mixing some messy desert into the morphing brown as a first highlight stage, and basically covering more or less the front, or the part that will reflect the most light. Next, with a thinned down where your light source is, I'm painting the brighter parts painting from the horse skin. And at this point this might seem a bit too bright, but when Doomble Brown dries, it dries up darker, so don't worry about that. I'm kind of outlining my brightest parts first, and then I'm going over that 2 or 3 more times, making sure that those brightness is only in the places I want them to be. Then for the manes and tail I'm using Rock Art Flash to get a nice bright look in there. Next I'm dry brushing some Rock Art Flash on the knees in very highlights of the horse skin, and that way the colors kind of come together a little bit more. Finally, I'm using a fine detail brush to pick out the outline of the blanket beneath the saddle. The outside of that is also painted with the same ragged flesh. Then with some Rhinox hide I'm painting the inside, which is the padded or quilted part. It has some structure in there, which we're going to be highlighting later on. First I'm washing the helmet with some Nuln Oil to get some nice shading in there. And I'm doing the same on the sword. Next, with some Agrax Earthshade, I'm shading the manes and tail. Next is time for some Caliban Green, and the outer part of this blanket is done with green, leaving the extreme outer part with the rugged flesh we painted before. So it has this nice bright rim surrounding it. Then we're highlighting the padded brown part we painted before with some corn red. Thin that down with some water and paint it over the middle of the raised parts. So you get a nice dark middle and brighter top part, which really emphasizes the illusion of depth. Then with some Retributor armor, we're painting all these gold details on the reins, the rings, as well as the top of the saddle. Also, we're painting a fine gold line in the middle here, and those gold ornaments on the cloth below the saddle. Again, hold your brush sideways if you find it difficult to paint this. And also the stirrups are painted with the same gold color. Next I'm using some palette witch flesh because this head has his mouth open and teeth are showing, so I'm painting those with that. And make sure the inside of the mouse is darker. Then with some Steel Legion drab, I'm painting the hooves on this horse. I'm then using Rhinox hide for the actual saddle on top of the cloth. It's barely visible, but it's there. Next, with some Stormhost silver and a dry brush, I'm painting some details on the helmet and the side of the sword. Give that some sharpness as well. And then back to the fine detail brush, we're giving the front of the sword a sharp side here, and I'm doing the same on some details on the helmet. Then with pure lead belcher we're painting the horseshoes. And As a final detail, I'm using Steel Legion drab to give the reins an edge highlight. And here's the finished version of Háma, the Prince of Rohan, from the War of the Rohirrim Middle-earth strategy battle game. That is a mouthful. I think he looks amazing, and I'm really enthusiastic about the saddle, the cloth beneath, the bright colors on these miniatures. I hope your paint job was successful as well, and please let me know in the comments what you think of this video and your result. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll reply to every comment. I would really appreciate it if you would follow me on my channel here, subscribe to it, and also check out my Patreon page, as I'll be making different content on each channel, and some will be exclusive to the channel itself. So check it out, you can check it out for free, and follow me for free if you want, and consider upgrading to a paid account on Patreon if the content appeals to you. So for now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Bye bye!